So, welcome everyone. Today our guest is Professor Leonard Wantchekon from Princeton University. He is a professor of politics and international studies and also affiliated with the economics department. He's a true social scientist and we are very happy to have you here. Good morning from Melbourne, Leonard. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you.
So today we will be talking about one of your papers that you wrote about a decade ago with Nunn from Harvard about trust and how it relates to slave trade. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can start by you telling us a bit why you think that trust is important for economics.
Yeah, trust is actually the belief that individuals or a given individual is reliable. So you can see this is very, very important concepts when you are involved in an economic transaction. And also every choice that you make, you have to have a strong belief that whomever you are dealing with is reliable. It's somebody that you can actually, interact and involve in a transaction with. So this is actually a very, very central concept in economics in general. In development economics in particular, where you have institutions being not very, very strong, in terms like legal, court are not extremely strong and very reliable. And people have to make choices without external enforcement of whatever transaction they are making. So in that context, individual trust is extremely important, not only for the quality of transaction, but also the quantity of transactions. Yeah.
So what is the historical background of your paper? You talk about slavery in Africa. Where are we placing historically?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, slavery is an extremely important element of African history and African societies because it lasted so long, almost 4 centuries. It's also because it demographically, socially impacted Africa in the deepest way, Like, to give you one example, in 1960, my country of origin, Benin, has a population of 1,200,000 people, roughly. But according to estimates made about how many slaves were exported from Benin, it's almost 700,000.
Wow.
You understand that, like it took even more than a century after slavery was ended. We could barely match in terms of population the number of people who left. So, and what is interesting is that those people who left, they were artists, they were intellectuals, they were, women, men, boys, girls, it has a really, really profound impact on African societies. And also, growing up, you can relate many aspects of the culture, like songs and artifacts, and also some institutions that directly relate to the imagery of slavery. For instance, one of the reasons why I got involved in this project is because with Nathan is because I was talking to my wife one day, and she was recalling one of her friends who very common way will say, so-and-so is going to make you disappear. So-and-so is going to make you, is going to sell you. And I was like, what does it mean? Somebody who is 10 years old saying that somebody will make someone else disappear. You know, nobody disappearing, nobody being sold. And yet that's how you relate lack of trust, lack of reliability of a person to, you know, that's how you define it. So as a result, I saw a clear link between slavery and trust, you know, and you can see, I mean, even many popular songs are very negative, you know, telling people not to be very careful when you are dealing with even your family members and stuff, you know. So I realized growing up that slavery really has a deep, serious impact on slavery. Obviously, when I was growing up as well in the 60s and 70s, you know, I discovered basically the history of a voyage. You know, I saw, you know, like ships and how people were traveling. And when you, and it was so tragic, you know, for me growing up. So I got interested. But besides that, you also have the fact that, you know, you also have the fact that, you know, I mean, you realize that most communities in Africa were migrant communities, you know, like within internal migration, you know, people, like for instance, my own village when I was growing up, you know, people come from everywhere, but we're all fleeing slave. I mean, you know, being caught by slave, you know, being caught and being sold, that they move around and so on. So you see a sense of instability and a sense of, you know, permanent migration that shape the communities where we live. And even, you know, I find that, you know, the fact that maybe even the houses are built not to last. Many houses in African villages are not built to last too long, you know, because it's makeshift houses most of the time. And why people who are so smart, people who are so ingenious will build house, will have living in this kind of, to some degree, primitive, you know, housing. But I realized that it's when you're moving around everywhere all the time, why would you, you know, anyway, so with time, I thought that one of the central aspects of African societies is not only what's happened to people who left, but also what's happened to people who stay behind, you know? And I'm reminded all the time, you know, from song, from music, from arts, from proverbs, that this was very much part of who we are. So I think it's, the background is, it's exactly that. And I think, I mean, I'm very glad that this paper captured the spirit of this experience that I had growing up. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, what you do in the paper is then to say, well, the slave trade wasn't equally strong throughout Africa, but there is variation across different locations and ethnicities, and that explains variation in trust, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for instance, one of the main findings of the paper is that, you know, places that were close to the coast, that were more exposed to slave exports, the trust level were much lower. And places that are further away from the coast, or places that were harder to reach, you know, because of the geography, the landscape, they have, you know, there were high level of trust, you know. So that's interesting, you know, because it just shows how central slavery was in explaining, or is in explaining level of trust in Africa and hence level of development. But then what is interesting here is that, like places close to the coast are places that have more opportunities for development because they are more exposed to international trade. They were the places where European settlers, set up, formal institutions. But then those are the places that were more impacted by slavery and by low trust. As a result, places in which in one dimension have more opportunities to develop, and this opportunity were hammered by this other aspect of history, which is slave trade. And places, because of they are further away from trade route, further away from formal European institutions, they were less impacted by slave trade. They have more opportunity to develop. So several aspects of African history have negative or positive aspect on development, which means that you don't have the opportunity that many European countries or America has, where development starts somewhere because of trade and it can expand, can expand to the interior. You see what I mean? So you see that overall development, for instance, in Africa, are even drastically impacted by places that have more opportunities to develop. That's where you have low trust and the missed opportunity, for African development. Anyway, yeah.
That's fascinating. Now I'm curious, how did you collect it? What sort of data did you use for your analysis? How did you collect it, and how can we interpret the results at the end?
So basically, the data was collected, through, several ways. First of all, Nathan, my co-author, has a country level, data sets, data estimates of slave exports. And then for this project in particular, it was disaggregated at ethnicity level. And the way it was done is through census, slave census. And, because every slave census has not only places where people went, but places where they came from and their ethnicity, and you pull all this together, then it gives you a sense not only of how many slaves were exported, but also where they came from, where the ethnicity was. And then we use other kind of techniques and to actually be able to, to estimate ethnicity by ethnicity, slaves that were captured and exported. So that's how the data was collected. So it's mostly using archives and particularly census of slaves across the Americas and Europe and also in Africa. So that's how this is done. I should note that there is a massive kind of literature on slavery, and Patrick Manning in particular, for instance, has really contributed to this research on the demographics of slave exports. And it's with all this together that, in his earlier paper, in particular in this paper, in earlier paper, Nathan, and in this paper as well, we have been able to put together, the estimate of slave exports by country and by, by ethnicity.
Amazing. And then you link that with individual level data on trust from the Afrobarometer, right? And
exactly.
That way you can see how trust levels are today,
exactly.
person by person. Yeah.
Exactly. So typically what happens is that there was from the early 90s, from the late 90s, there was a survey on trust level on Africa that's conducted in several African countries, 17 to begin with. And people were asked, do you think that in general people could be trusted? Do you know your your family members or your co-ethnics and so on? And and then there is people say yes, people say no, or somewhere in between. And we use the response to this question to measure the trust level across Africa, ethnic group by ethnic group, aggregating this individual level measure. So that's what, and then the exercise was basically to link the ethnicity level slave exports to trust level in that ethnicity. And then and then we find negative correlation, meaning that places that have more slave exports, on average, people are less trusting,
Yeah.
And then, considering everything else like education, like income, everything that will affect trust were put in. And even that, you can see a very strong negative correlation between, trust level and slave exports, so which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I found fascinating is you also know people who moved within Africa from the original place of their own ethnic group, and you show that, so to say, they carry this negative legacy with them, right? So even if now they live in a different environment where maybe people are more trustworthy, you still find that people with a certain ancestry, this experience of more intense slave trade, they are less trusting of others, right? So it's...
Exactly. So basically the story here is that there are two ways slave exports can affect trust level. One is something that happened to your ancestors that get them to develop low trust, and this is carried from generation to generation. Like for instance, like somebody was tricked into slavery, like in a community early 18th century, right? So, and it happened because, like a neighbor comes and say, can you take me to the farm? And your ancestor went with this guy and never came back. So as a result, the lesson learned is that when somebody asks you to take him to the farm, say no. Even if it's somebody from your extended family. And then this norm and this lesson, this way of resisting to the threat of being captured is transmitted from generation to generation. Like your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandmother will tell your father, your grandfather, well, when somebody comes to you and say this, say no, don't do it, And it's based on the experience that we have before, So the transmission from generation to generation, this is the cultural channel because it's lesson learned that is transmitted, okay? So, but then there is the second channel. The second channel is the institutional. It could well be, like up to 20%, or 17% of people who were sold on slave were captured or they were sold as a result of a judicial process, meaning basically some chiefs were using the judicial process as a way to get slaves and sell them, So you can say this will weaken the institutions, will weaken the extent to which the legal institution in the community work well. Yeah. So if that's the case, it means that there might be low trust because of where you come from, what you learn from your generation to generation. You might have low trust because where you move to, in a sense that if you move to a place where there are high level of slave export, then the institution there will be not very strong. And as a result, and weak institution generate low trust. And as a result, the low trust will come. So then it's important to compare identical people who, move to a place with high exports versus places where have low exports. And this will get you a sense of the low trust coming from culture, and the one that a similar exercise for the one that coming from weak institution, if you will, and this is what we find. And we find that, like the strongest kind of effect of slave exports come from the cultural channel, which is very interesting because, again, you can not only you can have a sense of that not only through the way people are educated within their family, but also what I mentioned, like art and music, where you carry the idea that, well, you have to be very careful, you have to stay away from people, blah blah blah, and so on. Anyway, so yeah, I think this is really, I think, the most interesting part of the exercise, showing that the transmission of mistrust was mostly through families and through communities. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leonard. Now, something more personal. I'm curious. So you're a social scientist, generally. You're not an economist. You're a social scientist. You study politics. You study everything, right? What inspired you to become a social scientist? What's your story?
Oh, that's a great question. Growing up, let me put it this way. I was very good in math, for sure, but then I was always very curious about social relationships. Like, for instance, there are people who grow up being fascinated by the physical nature, like the way, why plants smell, why some animals are very tiny, some are very big. For me, it was basically more about, about communities, about societies, for instance, how social change happen, why, for instance, how communities organize, why, for instance, why property rights, why it's important, and so yeah, I was very fascinated by social science from very very early. But the second important aspect for me is also that I've seen a lot of injustice, like people who work very hard, very smart, but barely have what they need to survive. And, and also I've seen a lot of abuse, like my own parents, for instance. My dad was arrested because he was late to pay taxes, which was basically, basically 1/3 of his annual income. He couldn't afford to pay tax because he was a subsistence farmer. And I can remember vividly he's being arrested and abused. So I entered very early student movement. I organized my first student strike when I was in the 8th grade. I was arrested the first time for protest when I was in 11th grade. And, I moved very left very early. So I was very observational, but also I was very, fascinated by what you can do to make people's life better. And so even then, I was not become social scientist until, you know, when I was at the university, a friend of mine brought me Das Capital, you know. This is, you know, you know, I find it beautiful. I find especially book one so well written. It was poetic. It was rigorous, analytical. And so I realized that in fact, it's possible that complex social phenomenon can actually be written up in a way that's rigorous, that's beautiful. I mean, this is maybe even better. I saw that better in book 2 or 3, you know, the one that people thought that Engels wrote, that talk about the mechanics of development, you know, like talk about, for instance, sectors that produce machine that help produce goods, whatever. Anyway, so I'm not sure if I still remember all these things. Anyway, but that's how it started. So, and then when I moved to Canada, you know, later on, I was enrolled in math, but then I met someone who induced me to take some econ classes. And I realized that in fact, you can actually use math in a very formal way to study economics. So I switched from, actually, it's better than that because I refuse to move from math to economics. And he basically told me that if I were to put me in a fast track program, if I enroll in economics, I can finish my bachelor in 1 year. But and I knew that I have to take 4 years to finish my bachelor in math. So he saw the potential and gave me a brutal inducement to be able to switch from math to economics. I fall into it. And I think that's the best decision that I made because it connects very well with what I used to do when I was young. It get me to, and also it get me to be able to impact lives in a very, very, very concrete way, you know, and it also get me to study so many aspects of social life, history, sociology, psychology, economics, and political science. So yeah, anyway, I think social science is far more than supply and demand, far more than money, as people say. Social science is actually really about people, about communities, about societies, and ways to get people to live better lives, or how you get communities to prosper and to grow. And, you know, I think, and more, you know, you have tools that you can use to do it rigorously, and you can find a way to make concrete suggestion, proposal on how can make life better. So I think for me, I think it's just fantastic, you know. And obviously, not everybody do economics the same way. But I mean, my preferred kind of approach to economics is what I described, you know, not to make any judgment on other type of approach to the study of economics. Yeah.
Yeah, an amazing trajectory.
Yeah.
Now you've now spent several decades in North America, but some years ago you had the big idea of founding something new in Africa, right? So the African School of Economics.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that? So how it started and how it's going?
Yeah. So okay. So it's interesting. So first of all, I just love economics. You know, I felt like I shouldn't be the only one who to do it. I should get other people to do it. And one way to do it is to get everybody, to persuade everyone to switch from physics to math to economics. But another way, which is more effective, is to set up a school where you can start telling people, you know, that, well, you know, you need life to get better. You need to weigh in the future of your family, your country, you need economics, and economics is very, very inclusive. So I thought that instead of, okay, so that's one of my main motivation, bring a lot of people, young people in particular, to study economics. But at the same time, I thought that, okay, if you want to promote the kind of economics that you are doing, you might as well set up a school where you design the curriculum, So in my school, for instance, you do a lot of micro, you have to do economic history. If you don't pass economic history class, I mean, forget it, you have to do economic history, and at the same time, you also have to do research, you have to be able to ask good questions, to be able to, regardless the level you are at, so I designed the curriculum, and I thought that instead of praying for the right economics to be done, why not design a school that train economics the way you want, the way you think it's right, and then promote that model from there, But another thing that I also motivate me is the fact that, like you can make a big impact, across generation by setting up a school. Like I grew up in a small village of 350 people, and that place has, because the school was set up about two centuries ago, that school have, in a population of 350 and 40 kids from my generation, that place have nearly 15 PhD. I mean, more precisely 13 PhDs.
Wow.
I mean, the impact of a school set up 2 centuries ago, it's incredible. I mean, and those kids, they all come from, people from my generation, we are all first generation, but we are everywhere. My friends are in France, in Martinique, in Germany, everywhere. It's a huge success story. So I told myself, if you set up a school and that school grow across generation, it could make a huge impact, So that's my motivation. But now the school is doing very well. We have a campus in Benin and Côte d'Ivoire. We are franchising the model of education, franchising the model of econ training that we have into many other African countries, So even places where we don't have a campus, we can design and implement the curriculum that we have. South Africa, Morocco, Nigeria, and so on. Okay, so that's one. Now, the school is also providing a joint degree in economics in Harlem at the City University of New York with Hunter College. Yeah, so next semester, we are going to have students coming from US universities as a way to deal with the issue of representation of African Americans and Black in general in the profession. I think you can share a link with the students and to show what we are trying to do. So now this model that is developed in Benin is being exported in the US.
Fantastic.
Like for instance, the usual idea is that it goes the other way around. It's not like you build a model in Africa that works very well, and you think, oh, I can just bring it to the US. I mean, it doesn't happen that way in general. So, anyway, so that's where that's where we are. I also need to stress the fact that 80% of the income that we generate it's from research. Basically, it's not tuition based at all. It's all research based. Which is a very different model. We don't charge high tuition, which is actually low tuition, and students pay with participation in research. So anyway, I can talk about ASC for days, so I might as well stop there,
Amazing. Look,
Amazing.
That was fascinating. And I think the students will love it, definitely. Thank you so much for your time, Leonard. And I hope to meet you again soon, face to face.
Absolutely.
And we have a longer chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Sascha.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.